My guest today is going to talk about something that we haven't got to yet, and that is the subject of weight loss. And this is weight loss without willpower, no special diets, no crazy exercises, right? It's all in the power of the mind. And then we're going to map that across to the rest of our life. We're going to figure out how those principles apply in every area of life, but specifically weight loss. And today with me is the expert, Lori Hammond. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you for having me, Nicholas. I am honored to be here.
It's my pleasure. And this is something that it hasn't affected me per se, being heavy, but I have this relationship with food from being a wrestler where it was like feast and famine, right? And so I would starve myself and have that discipline, and then we'd make weight, wrestle, and then I would just binge eat again. And I still have that pattern a little bit in our life. And so food is something that's we can't avoid it, right? We can not be around a bar or not be around cigarettes, but food we have to be around. So talk to us about the relationship that people have with food.
Yes, I love that you started with that, because I have had friends who were wrestlers, and I see that almost obsessiveness over what you're putting in your body, what you're doing. And I don't know, for me, I tend to be a real all or nothing perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that in wrestlers too, where it's like they're either taking it all in or avoiding it completely. And I have had people in my program who are professional bodybuilders or competition fitness models, and some of them struggle just as much with their diet as people who are extremely overweight. So my goal with my program, more than anything, is to help people get into a place of self-love and self-acceptance, and learn how to enjoy life and how to accept themselves and have a peaceful relationship with food. And that freaks a lot of people out, because they think, okay, if I start to like myself the way I am now, I'm just going to become complacent and stay stuck. And my experience has been that the opposite is true. And when you actually step into peace with food, into peace with your body, and you drop all these restrictive rules and these obsessive diets, that you're actually able to start to release that weight and to start to tune into your body and listen to your body for cues to eat instead.
Yeah, I think we lost your image. Can you?
Oh, shoot. I apologize for that.
That's okay. I want to look at you.
I saw that it went away, and I didn't realize it was a problem on my end.
There we go. Yeah.
Do you want me to back up?
No, you're good. I
Okay.
think read your body language and your facial expressions. So
I was going like this. It was really awesome.
So there's so many different diets out there, right? Game Changers comes out and says, well, you can't eat meat. And then there's, Joe Rogan just posted, he was eating the all meat diet and lost 12 pounds. And then there's like, you got to go keto where you're burning fat, and you got to go just vegetables. And there's all these crazy diets out there, but really our body tells us what to eat, doesn't it?
I really believe that. And I have tried them all. I have eaten keto for years before it was ever cool. And I did it for my mental health more than anything. I read a book called Grain Brain by Dr. Perlmutter that talks about the effects of grains on our emotions. And so I really enjoy the keto diet, and I used to preach it to people and try to make everybody do it. And I started to observe that some people do really well on a vegan diet. Some people do well on a high carb diet. And I really don't think that there is a one size fits all formula. I believe that when we start to trust ourselves, and when we start to tap into that part of us that knows the things we don't know we know, we start to intuitively know what we should be putting in our body and what we should be avoiding. And we can do it from a place of self-love and being kind to ourselves, instead of this should and should not, that creates almost what I call forbidden fruit syndrome, where the very fact that you're not supposed to have it makes your mouth water for it even more and makes you obsess about it. So you're making yourself miserable anyway.
Well, scarcity is one of the biggest influencers. Is when something is scarce, we want it more, right? And so when we do that to ourselves, it increases our appetite for something, which it's good to be aware of that. So I want to ask you something, because I believe that at the heart of influence is rapport, right? You have to have rapport before you influence. And as a hypnotist, you know that. But most people don't realize is that we have to be in rapport with our subconscious as well. And I think that the number one killer of rapport is judgment. And so we often, tell us what happens when we start to judge ourselves. We have a meal that we shouldn't, shouldn't, quote unquote, and we judge ourselves. We look in the mirror and we judge ourselves. What happens when we judge ourselves?
This is awesome. This is something I love to get on my soapbox about. So when a person is beating themselves up about their decision, or when they look in the mirror and they think, oh, if only I could lose that 20 pounds, or they're snapping their jeans in the morning and there's some muffin top up above, so they
Mhm.
start obsessing about that muffin top and what they're doing wrong. Our subconscious mind drives us toward our focus. It must. It's just the way our brains work. So when we're focusing on what's supposedly wrong with us and what we did wrong, and what we wish we could fix about ourselves, it is actually driving us toward more of that behavior that we're trying to correct. And when we step into a place of kindness towards ourselves, and it's going to feel inauthentic at first. I remember as a little girl, I know this is a faulty memory. As you know, every time we access a
Yeah.
memory, we change it. So I know it couldn't have really happened like this. But I remember my mom explaining to me that the definition of narcissism was loving yourself. And so I literally grew up thinking that it was wrong to love myself. And there's a scene in the Mean Girls movie where they're all standing around looking in the mirror, saying mean things, and almost teaching each other to be mean to themselves.
Mhm.
And so I believe that we've all trained ourselves to be critical, and that we can shift that and start to train ourselves to be kind, but it's going to feel really weird at first. And so I actually have the people in my weight loss program look themselves in the eye, look themselves in the mirror once a day and tell themselves, I love you, I see you, thank you, and find one tiny thing to acknowledge that they did right. Because every time we focus on a good decision, whether it's leaving one extra bite of food on your plate, whether it is doing 5 squats when you wake up in the morning, every time you focus and congratulate yourself for something that you did well, you are literally wiring in and strengthening neural pathways that keep you repeating that good behavior on autopilot. So in the same way, a person isn't trying to eat that extra serving of cheesecake. They're not trying to obsess about the brownies. It's just happening automatically. When you start to shift to a place of acknowledging what you're doing right and every little good decision you make, it directs your subconscious mind to say, okay, do more of this,
Mhm.
focus on this. And the more you're focusing on what you're doing well, the easier it becomes to just keep up that good behavior.
Well, and what you focus on expands, right? So if you keep focusing on,
Absolutely.
even if it's just something tiny about what you did right, and you focus on that, and that's going to expand over time until you have a totally different life, right?
Absolutely. And what you resist persists.
Correct.
So if you are trying to stop overeating or stop being lazy and not going to the gym, you're actually going to struggle even more with that thing.
Yeah. So and resistance for me, I talk about this a lot, is very similar, or if not the same thing as attachment, right? We're
Yeah.
attached to looking a certain way. We have attachment to making so much money, having a certain result. And that attachment, it's like, you think about a used car salesman who needs to make a sale. It's like, ooh, like we get creeped out by it. And in the same way, like anytime we have attachment to that, the universe, like, it's like we create this energetic distance from it. So if you're so attached to a certain body image, you block it almost because you want it so much. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I haven't thought about it that way. And I love that you brought that up because that's a really cool way to look at it.
Yeah, well, in Buddhism, it's the root of all suffering is attachment. When we're attached to something, like it's neediness in a relationship, you're just like, oh, get away from me, like it's too much, right? And in every area of life, anytime we're attached, I think we create a barrier between that result.
I agree with you. And, as hypnotists, one of the first things we learn is to tell people to use the word try to to make people realize that they're failing at something. And
Right.
I think the more we're trying to reach this thing that feels so elusive to us, the more it's escaping our grasp. I mean, the word try has failure built into it.
Yeah.
Yoda knows this.
Of course, of course.
Yes.
Any hypnotist uses the word try to get somebody to fail.
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of things came up here, and the self-love stuff is fantastic. And that's the mirror work. I don't know if you got that from Louise Hay or where that originated, but
I did get that from Louise Hay years ago. Yeah.
yeah, looking ourselves in the mirror. And I was at an event with a buddy, and like we were doing that exercise, and he was like, "It feels so weird. Like I'm not comfortable with it." Right? And he's been doing it for a while now, and it's like a totally different. It's a shift, and he feels comfortable because when you can access that self love, you can start to change your life because you get into rapport with yourself, right?
Yes. You know what I suspect, Nicholas, is when you're looking at yourself right in the eye, I think some of that weirdness is that there's almost an awareness that you're speaking to that part of you that you aren't in rapport with, and it starts to build that rapport. And the coolest thing happened when I first started doing this. And I read Louise Hay talking about this years ago, and I thought, that's dumb. I'm not going to do that. That'd be so weird. And she got in my head, and I started practicing it. And a few months ago, I really saw some people in my weight loss program who were struggling in this area. So I incorporated this exercise in, and I want to practice what I preach. So when I started doing it myself, a few days later, I was in a setting. I'll just tell you because I don't know how to tell this story without being completely transparent. So I was in church, and I'm not a regular church goer. I used to be, and I'm not anymore, but my daughter was singing in church, and I wanted to hear her sing. And in the past, I've sat in church and I've thought, I remember one time being so aware of myself, sitting there thinking of all these judgmental, self-righteous people, and realizing that I was sitting there being judgmental and self-righteous. So a few weeks after I started doing this mirror work, I'm sitting in church and I'm looking out, and I just realized that I just felt love towards these people, and a sort of an understanding of why this is important to them and why it's meaningful and special to them. And I remember thinking, why am I not being judgmental? And I realized that so much of it is just because I've started to give kindness to myself, and I've stopped reflecting that judgment. And you know, I haven't arrived. I'm not perfect, but it was such a peaceful place to be able to sit there in non-judgment and in acceptance and in understanding, because I've started to give that to myself.
Yeah, that's great. And I think how we judge people outside of us is just a reflection of how we judge ourselves, right? And
I agree.
so shifting that that's very powerful. So on the weight loss thing, let's talk about identity for a little bit, because I know I read some of your content, and you know, shifting the identity is so big because willpower only lasts so long, right? It's such a small piece, and by lunch our willpower is usually out the window, so we're running on identity in our subconscious program. So how does identity fit into your program?
It's a big component. I love the idea of parts work, and so the way I explain it in my program, and I learned this from Mike Mandel, is to think of all the different parts of you almost like different kids in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of those kids has a different set of abilities, a different set of beliefs, a different set of behaviors. And when you have a different kid in the front of the classroom, all of a sudden it becomes easier for you to exude these different abilities. So oftentimes when we are struggling with a craving, or we're struggling with a desire to overeat, it's more about who we are being than what we are doing. So I used to struggle with depression. I struggled with depression for the first 3 decades of my life. And I was so used to bringing sad Lori to the front of the classroom that it was just this really strong neural pathway in my mind. And I considered myself, I am depressed. This is like the name badge that I wore. And I think the best thing that I have learned in hypnosis is how to change that kid in the front of the classroom, and that we are in charge. And before we started recording, you were talking about how much body language comes into play. And so one of the coolest things I've learned is that you can change the kid in the classroom by changing your posture. So if you're doing this, you know, this is how depressed kid looks. And when you're doing this, depressed kid has to sit down. Only one kid can stand in front of the classroom at a time. So if you have happy kid up front and you have your face to the sky and you're smiling, it releases chemicals in your body that put you in control, that let you, two things can't be in the same space at the same time. So when you're excreting happy chemicals in your body, those sad chemicals are going to dissipate. And it's just an amazing thing. So I think that identity change is easier than we think.
Yeah.
And when you do it, it makes everything else easier.
And we can even name those parts of us, right? I was talking with Mike Mandel, and I use peppermint to access, like I anchor that to my charismatic state. So anytime I'm talking, speaking, creating content, I just like with my peppermint, my body language shifts, my energy shifts, and you know, we talked about my antenna theory. I tune into a different frequency where my thoughts and capabilities are consistent with that part of me. And so a lot of times with the diet stuff, anytime we're around food, a certain part of us may tend to step forward. So we can change the part of us that shows up, or we can change the programs in that part that has the cravings, right?
Yes. I love that idea of peppermint as an anchor. That's really cool.
Yeah, it gets, if I smell it, I get like super excited. So I gotta be
Yeah.
with it. But yeah, so I think just strengthening those different parts of us. And what are some ways that people can understand, I guess, shifting in a different identity around food?
Well, have you read the book, The As If Principle by Richard Wiseman?
I haven't.
You've got to read this one. It's so good. It talks a lot about the science behind how our body dictates our emotions. We
Mm-hmm.
think that we see a bear and run because we're afraid, but what is actually happening is our body starts running and we realize that we're afraid. And they've tested this in the lab to show that our emotions follow our body. So one of the things the tools that I give the people in my weight loss program to help them step out of a craving is when they're at a meal and they are afraid of, this is one of those things where we try not to eat too much when we go out to eat, but it's our favorite restaurant and our favorite food. And we just know when we start, we're going to eat too much. So we're mentally rehearsing eating too much. Our self-talk is, I'm out of control. We're building all these components in that are just ensuring that we're going to eat too much. And so one thing that I'll show people to do is just to simply push the food away from them. They're showing themselves, they're seeing their body push the food away from them, and then even lean back and like make a face at the food and say in their mind, I am content, I am satisfied. And it completely takes willpower out of the equation. They're not trying to do anything. They're essentially, it's one of those, people don't like the idea of fake it till you make it. But when you're doing this with your body, you're showing your subconscious mind, I am content, I am satisfied. So a lot of the tools that I give people are so easy, they seem too simple, but when people try it, it's so effective. I had a lady the other day, right after the holidays. She said, I got all the junk food out of my house, and I do fine when it's not around me, but somebody gave me a gift of snacks. And so I'm just out of control. And I said, okay, I want you to take the snacks, and I didn't know what they were, and I want you to throw them across the room and stand up tall and look at them on the floor and say, I'm the boss. And she said just the image of her throwing chips across the room made her laugh so hard that she realized that she was completely in control. And so I didn't know it was chips, but there's little games we can play. I think that our subconscious mind loves silly and loves imagination. So the more imaginative we get, if imagine ourselves flying up above the situation and being in control and being lighthearted and stop taking ourselves so darn seriously all the time, it can help us change on that identity level. So we're changing who we are being. Because if a person has ever experienced being in control or ever experienced feeling satisfied with the appropriate amount of food, then that is a kid that's available to them in the front of their classroom, and they can learn how to re-access that. Even what you talked about with anchoring peppermint, I'll show my clients to anchor that first bite of food. As soon as they notice themselves taking that first bite of food, to take a deep breath with a long exhale, which puts them in the parasympathetic nervous system and lets them rest and digest. And then just to give themselves a positive suggestion. We are our own best hypnotists, and to say, I am easily satisfied. And then to rehearse themselves, just to have imagine an image of themselves throwing the extra food away or putting it away or pushing their plate away halfway through. And that then acts as a compass for their subconscious mind to make it happen on autopilot.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot there. So even like I teach, if there's a task that you don't want to do, just lean and step forward. Like when you think about it, like lean and step forward and just take the action, and your body will follow. And it's the same thing. Like if you don't want it, even if you're craving it, just push your body backwards. And if you crinkle your nose, like disgust, like your body will follow suit and start to feel disgusted maybe. And then you can, overcome that urge with just tricking your body.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. Okay. Um, so talk to us about the importance of preparation around food. So I know, like, I live alone and I go to the store and I buy healthy foods, and then you put me in an environment with my family, and there's not so healthy options. I'm not quite as good. So how important is it to, prepare to prevent us from even having to do some of these steps?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I may give you an unexpected answer. So I think preparation is really important, but I'm more into the mental preparation. So part of my program incorporates every morning rehearsing your day mentally.
Hmm.
And it's more about the mindset around food, the mindset around your abilities, bringing the right kid to the front of the classroom. And part of why I do this is I borrowed from Connie Ray Andreas, who is just a master NLP practitioner and a naturally thin person who has never struggled with her weight. And she writes a book called The Heart of the Mind, where she shows us how people who don't struggle with their weight think about food. And a person who is naturally thin, for lack of a better word, to me that just means someone who has a healthy relationship with food in their body. That person will sometimes indulge in food that is not ideal for them, but they're actually listening to their physical stomach, which is just below the rib cage, and a lot of people don't realize that. They'll tune into their physical stomach to decide what to eat and how much to eat, and they'll kind of check in with each bite to decide if they're going to feel better not having another bite or having another bite. So while I definitely think it's important to make healthy choices and to have healthy food and to make sure that your fridge is stocked with healthy food, I also want people to understand that they can be the boss, even if someone has gifted them with snacks or if there are unhealthy choices. Sometimes we are truly physically hungry, and the only option we have is to eat something crappy,
Hmm.
and we can still tune into our body and not do this thing that I used to do where I'm like, oh, I had one bite of cheesecake, I might as well eat all the cheesecake, and still listen to our body and eat the amount that's appropriate for us. So more than anything, I want people to just develop a good relationship with their body. And so I talk a lot more about the mental preparation than the physical preparation, although I do think that that is very important.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, and it's the basics. We can ask ourselves, is this bite going to make me healthier, or is it going to make me unhealthier? Like, is this next bite going to serve me, or is it not? And just that, I talk a lot about self-talk, and just that question, you're going to come up with an answer, right? Your body's going to know instantly. And so then it's either helping you or hurting you. And then you take the actions accordingly. So I think that's some really good insights. And so we can apply that to all areas of our life, right? The idea of mentally preparing, creating the identity, knowing what questions and self-talk we're going to ask ourselves around any situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think all these principles apply to every area. A lot of what I teach really applies to anxiety. I believe that cravings are a form of anxiety because we're in the future. We're thinking about this thing that we can't have or that we shouldn't have or that we're going to have. And that's the same thing a person is doing when they're experiencing anxiety. They're thinking, what if this bad thing happens? Or how is this thing going to be in the future? And when you come back into right now and you just be here, you get access to all those resources that you didn't realize are inside of you. And you start getting this perspective that shows you solutions that you may have been missing by being out here in the future. So I think just about everything I teach can be applied to other areas of life.
Yeah, being present, right, is so important to tapping into that wisdom, to listening to your body, to understanding what to eat, what not to eat, what actions to take in business, what to say to people. And when you're not present, you get that anxiety. And I totally agree. And I believe that, like, stress and anxiety causes acid in our body, right? The
Mhm.
hormones related to that create an acidic environment. And because like energy craves like energy, right? Like this law of attraction, when we're acidic, we want acidic foods. We want coffee and alcohol and sugary snacks. And so if you ever notice, like, at the end of the day, when you're stressed out and you're run down, like, you just eat whatever's there because the cells in your body are acidic. And so you put a like substance in it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I love that. I love that. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
And so for me, like, we talked about the keto a little bit. I notice when I'm and I don't know that it's like a forever diet for me, but when I'm on keto or mostly in fat burning mode, I tend to be emotionally a little more stable, more sustained energy, a little less cravings, and a little bit less stressed out because my cells are resonating in a more like alkaline manner. So does that make sense to you?
It totally makes sense. And again, I've never thought of it that way in the context of the acid and the alkaline, but that makes so much sense.
And then you access different thought patterns, you have different capabilities, and your whole life looks different. And so just something, if I'm working with a coaching client, I just want them to keep in mind that in a stressed out and fearful state, they go into survival mode, and the subconscious takes over and runs their life. Well, one of the ways that we survive is by eating calories. And in times of, stressful times, that we eat a lot of calories so we can save up for the winter. And so when we're in a stressed out state, we lose that willpower, and it just goes right into, what can I eat that's going to make me feel better, and it's going to sustain me for the long haul, which is an old, couple thousand-year-old programming that we have.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I 100% agree with you. And so one of the things I talk about is how to change your mood without food, which is essentially how to get into that powerful state, because it never really works for food, does it? I mean, it distracts us for a minute and we think we feel great. And then a few minutes later, we feel worse than before.
Yes.
Because we realize we're still stressed out and now we're not going to fit in our pants tomorrow. So when you learn how to get into a different state first, then that desire for the food goes away without having to use willpower, without having to create this resistance. Instead, just changing your body language or changing your breathing and stepping into a resourceful place where you can kind of, get out of that fight or flight mode and into that peace mode.
Mm-hmm. So, and let me ask you this, because I think that we become like the people we spend time with. And if we're around healthy people that are exercising all the time, we're just going to naturally be more inclined to do that. And I know for people that are living with a family that might not be the healthiest, what are some ways that they can go back into an environment and sustain their own lifestyle and not take on the bad habits of the people that they're spending time with?
That is a really tricky one, because sometimes we have autonomy over who we're spending time with and sometimes we don't. So the people that I have counseled that are in that situation where perhaps they're in a marriage that they're not able or willing to leave and that spouse is really bringing them down, I will have them find every day. There's one girl that I'm doing this with right now, and every day she sends me an email and tells me 3 pieces of evidence that she is loved. And it could be something that her child came and gave her a hug, or one of her friends said something sweet to her at lunchtime. And I think that we find what we look for. So if we can tune our reticular activating system to start to notice the positive things, it acts as a bit of an antidote to that negativity. At the same time, I'm not sure I have a really amazing solution for this, because I look back at my 15-year marriage. It was a really unpleasant situation, and I've been divorced for 12 years now. And so much has changed in my life since I stepped out of that negative relationship. And so the honest answer is, when I look back and I think of being in that sort of toxic environment, it would have been really hard for me to change. But I do think there are ways that we can shield and protect ourselves from the negativity around us if we're not able to extricate ourselves. And part of that is just to look for the good, to acknowledge the good, to focus on what is beautiful about our lives.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes a little more work to manage our state in those environments, but I think it's even more important to focus on your body language, your energy, and not to get, it's so easy when somebody brings you down to just kind of shift your body down and meet them on their level. But like a lot of times when I'm around people that I don't want to, be in rapport with, I'll mismatch my body language and my language patterns. And so I'm not getting into the same frequency as someone else. And so that's something that someone can do, but it takes a little more work, right? To
Yes.
keep into that positive state. Okay. So another question, and this just popped into my head, is that I feel like at least sometimes people who have traumatic experiences, like maybe sexual assault at a young age, will often put on weight as a barrier of protection, right? The subconscious links up, well, if I'm heavy, I'll be protected. And I think weight, and Louise Hay's work as well, when there's a lot of excess weight, it can be a protection mechanism. How do you deal with clients that may come to you with something like that?
That's a really good question. And I completely agree with you. I think that weight can be a subconscious or even a conscious protective barrier. And so part of my program, I've iterated my program like every few months, I look at what's been working really well and what hasn't, and I move to make it better. So the program that I had in the past, I wanted to address all of those different things, all of
Mhm.
those different issues that are underneath. And one of the techniques I love is something that I learned from Melissa Tiers. It's called re-imprinting. And it's a form of regression therapy where you bring them to a past event that's been traumatizing them and help them essentially reimagine it and re-imprint the way that their unconscious mind is internalizing it, but it's done in a trauma-free way. So they're actually observing it from the third person as if it was, far away and down low on a TV screen and grainy. And you help them put resources into that scene that let them realize that they're safe now, that let their brain understand that this happened in the past and the past does not have to predict the present, and that they can move forward and have a beautiful future. And it works. I've had people that have come to me that have been in years and even decades of therapy, and they have been trying to resolve this issue, there's that word again, trying, and they genuinely want to, but it is almost like what you were saying about, what we resist persists, and that attachment. And when you get silly and imaginative and you do it on a subconscious level, I've seen people experience such a release from that trauma that translates into a release of that excess weight that they were holding on to. And it's a beautiful thing. And part of the reason I don't have that in my program currently, I'm always willing to share that video that I made that helps people walk through that with the people that are in there, or with anyone who's watching this and wants it. Um, Part of the reason I don't have that in there is because I think that even though our behavior of that was triggered by that past trauma
Mhm.
is keeping us stuck, that we can still change on that behavior level, and that it lets us it's almost like when the weight starts to release, we start to release that trauma as well. So I think it's like a chicken and egg first. I think it can work both ways.
I always teach it as I think there's this universal principle of like a feedback loop, right? And so if your emotions change, your body language will change. And if your body language changes, your emotions change. And so I think it's a similar principle, whereas if you can change the behavior and shed the weight, you'll start to shed the trauma. But if you shed the trauma, you'll also shed the weight. So I think it goes both ways, right?
Yes, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and you mentioned something, and you said this a couple times, as being silly and playful. And I believe that, as kids, we're often way sillier and way more playful than adults. And we learn faster, right? We're in a state of hypnosis, theta brainwave from 0 to 7, and we're learning about everything. And so when we move our body in a playful way, it opens our mind up and we can learn and take on new behaviors. And so I think, with something like weight loss and eating, it's so important to bring that playful energy into learning a new behavior, associate fun with eating vegetables and dancing, and you know what I mean, and start to associate that in your brain, because most of us have this, like, we celebrate with food, right? And it like fatty, sugary foods. And so like that's fun and playful. So I think we need a new playful behavior around eating healthy as well, correct?
I agree with you. Yes. Yes. You can almost imagine it as a dance, like that you're dancing with the vegetables. It's the more ridiculous we get in this work, I think the better our subconscious mind understands our intention to change and be healthy.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
good. Was there anything I'm missing? I feel like we covered a lot here.
I can't think of anything. I've enjoyed this conversation, and I'm happy to connect and to do this. And yeah, I think we've done a lot.
Okay, well, Lori, I'm excited to see you at Hypno Thoughts in Las Vegas for sure, if not sooner. Tell our listeners how they can get involved with your program.
Yes. So if you can find me at trancypants.com, and I will be at Hypno Thoughts this year in August. I'm also speaking with Freddie Jacquin in London on July 4th and 5th. We're doing a really awesome conference to empower women and the people who work with women to help with issues like weight loss and menopause, and just help them learn how to step into these powerful states. And then I believe I'm going to be at the UK Hypnosis Convention in November. So I have lots of
Awesome.
fun plans coming up.
Awesome. Yeah, Freddie's been a guest of the podcast, and I'm a big fan of his and his work. So that's great that you're partnering with him. And yeah, we'll send people to your website. And other than that, it's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to see you.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much, Nicholas.
Thanks.